Alright, listen, I know I'm rather late to the whole Superman party, but in my defense, I had been debating whether or not I was even going to make this review, given that Warner are a bunch of copyright gremlins who still to this day refuse to release my Flash video from copyright hell. So as you can probably already tell, I'm going to be extremely limited as to what I can actually show on screen. But I'll do my best to provide examples to back up certain claims wherever I'm able. Because while there are certain bits that I enjoyed in isolation, I would argue that James Gunn's Superman, in many areas, is an overcorrection for all the flaws that Man of Steel is riddled with. Where Snyder's take on the character was a near indestructible god, drenched in religious symbolism, inflicting cataclysmic collateral damage in his path, and not giving a singular shit about any of that, you have the inverse with this portrayal of Superman, who genuinely cares about saving people, but is constantly in a vulnerable or defensive position and has all the IQ and reasoning of a squirrel. They're both equally worthless, but for very distinct reasons. Also, there's not really any way for me to discuss this film in depth without delving into spoilers, so this is your last chance to click away, if you care about that sort of thing. With all of that said, before we crash land into James Gunn's tangled cosmic mess of a cinematic universe, we're presented with a text crawl establishing that it has been 300 years since the first appearance of metahumans. An already disastrous bit of exposition that not only is totally irrelevant to the plot, but in certain ways is actively in conflict with it. Outside of Luthor Corp and the Justice Gang, the world doesn't really have any systems or laws in place concerning metahumans and how they operate, along with any ramifications for what happens if one were to violate them, despite mankind surely having studied and dealt with metahumans over the course of 3 centuries. The rest of the information in this text crawl is also rather unnecessary, because they're plot beats that will either be brought up multiple times in conversation, or shown shortly after this wall of text. But I guess James really needed to fill everyone in on his weird fetish with the number 3 though. However, we see Superman crash land into the ice and is seriously injured from his battle with the hammer. I've seen a lot of people criticizing this decision for, frankly, all the wrong reasons. I think having the opening of the film more or less begin with Superman in a vulnerable position works, not only because of what's revealed later on in the plot, but because there are a lot of movies that will kick things off with a plot point that takes place right before the climax, creating initial intrigue, and then cut back to the beginning and or show flashback sequences to gradually build back up to that moment. The actual problem is that we're told that this is the first loss Superman has ever suffered, but the film leaves no room in terms of characterization for Clark to struggle with the gravity of that, because it's effectively in a mad dash to establish a good chunk, if not the entirety of the DCU. Which is one of my main criticisms with this movie. DC is once again making the same mistakes they made with the DCEU by foregoing properly developing their main heroes and standalone pieces, and immediately jumping into a cinematic universe ensemble film. Despite the title being Superman, it is by all intents and purposes a Justice League entry. And since we're relatively on the topic of cameos, Superman, desperate for help, whistles for his dog Krypto, who... Alright, listen. I like dogs. You like dogs. Everyone likes dogs.
I have just met you, and I love you.
But let's be honest with ourselves. This version of Krypto is kinda shit. His owner's bloodied and lying on the ground, something that I would imagine Krypto would definitely not be used to, but for some reason can't recognize that his owner needs help. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but most dogs are pretty good at picking up on that sort of thing, so again, kind of a weird way to introduce us to this version of Krypto. And this is by far not the only example of Krypto acting like a complete psychotic shithead. But Clark orders him to take him to the Fortress of Solitude, which I initially assumed would take a fair amount of time to trek there. But no, it's practically a stone's throw away from where he needed to land. If he had veered a bit more to the left, he would have made it. Also, these dumbass Cyclop droids weren't able to pick up that fucking Superman crashed near their fortress. They have all this crazy Kryptonian technology, but don't have so much as a doorbell cam? That seems like a rather glaringly retarded oversight that will surely get taken advantage of very soon. Though as Clark is brought inside, K2SO drops some clunky exposition and starts translating the initial message left by Jor-El and Lara. Or well, what remains of it anyways, because the film not so subtly lays out that the second half of the message being damaged in transit from Krypton will become extremely important. However, the droids then beam Clark with a giant magnifying glass that instantly heals him up, where he proceeds to fly back to Metropolis, but doesn't confront the engineer or warn his droids that she is headed for the Fortress of Solitude. The most charitable read I can give this decision is that Superman has absolutely no knowledge about her unfathomably god-tier nanite powers, and just chose to let her freeze in the polar wastes of Antarctica rather than apprehend and deliver her to the authorities.
Crap, mega crap.
While I do appreciate that this iteration of Superman doesn't actively seek out to cause 9/11 tier collateral damage times a million, and does genuinely care for the most part about saving people, there are still definitely moments where it seems like James Gunn was writing the script completely obliterated on ketamine, because Clark's, along with pretty much every other character's decision-making and judgment throughout the majority of this movie, is often incredibly erratic and profoundly brain-dead. This is further highlighted when we cut over to Metropolis, where the Hammer of Baravia, just moments after telling everyone that Superman should stay out of his country's affairs, immediately starts laser beaming civilians. By all metrics, this should create a monumental international problem for Baravia. The best case scenario results in Baravia disavowing the Hammer and him getting labeled as a terrorist by the UN, or worst case scenario, setting off an entire world war.
Target in sight.
He's back. You're 5 o'clock.
Copy.
So Lex should be completely fucked here, given that Clark has super hearing and should have absolutely overheard them, discovering that the Hammer isn't actually who he claims to be and is in league with Lex Luthor. All he has to do is give Lois a lead and have her reveal through an expose that the Hammer is actually Ultraman in disguise, or at the very least ask her to dig into any connections Lex might have with Baravia. But to make all of this 80 million times worse, it's revealed later on that Prime Minister Gurkos is actually one of Lex's accomplices, and apparently is totally on board with having Ultraman sent in disguise to melt a bunch of civilians under the Baravian banner, potentially jeopardizing his relationship with the US and other allies, where he's then in turn forced into a defensive position to disavow the Hammer. I guess the main question I'm left with that strategy is, fucking why? What do either of them benefit from this stunt? I mean, I suppose Lex learned where the Fortress of Solitude is, simply because he got insanely lucky that that's where Clark decided to go to heal up instead of flying out into space, but I feel like disguising Ultraman as some otherworldly invader would have been an infinitely better move than, I don't know, putting his co-conspirator at risk. To add insult on top of injury, you have Superman getting absolutely wrecked by Lex through voice commands in real time, meaning that even if Lex had actually memorized his moveset, as the film so desperately wants you to accept at face value, he would still have to be able to predict what Superman's going to do faster than Superman himself is able to carry out, which frankly is a heaping pile of horseshit. And keep in mind, this entire strategy heavily relies on these drones that follow Ultraman around, giving Lex a delayed feed of what's happening during their battles. In fact, it's rather staggering just how much of Lex's plan banks on pieces of equipment that Superman should be able to very easily spot and very easily destroy, along with hoping that Clark never overhears him shouting out injustice combos and figures out his strategy before effectively monologuing it to him towards the end of the film. Lex has already achieved numerous and unprecedented technological feats at this point, among them having discovered the means of creating pocket universes and creating metahumans, yet in the same vein either has no idea how, or worse, never considers designing an AI/algorithm brain implant for Ultraman to be able to analyze Superman's abilities. For someone who we are told is supposed to be hyper-competent and intelligent, his overall motives and methods are wildly impractical, to put it mildly. And the thing is, I really like Nicholas Holt's stab at Lex. There are a couple of moments where he and his bald head really shine. But unfortunately, his performance is bogged down by James Gunn reducing this version of the character into a window-licking brainlet. However, Ultraman ends up bitch-slapping Superman down to the ground, where he proceeds to immediately fly away for some weird fucking reason instead of killing him, despite that being Lex's explicitly stated goal.
It is the sole hope for humanity because it is what has driven me to annihilating you.
If the counter to this is that his main priority was destroying Superman's legacy, not only could he have accomplished that after his death, it would have been 10 times easier for him to do so. Not to mention, Superman's image internationally is already on shaky ground after having intervened in the Baravia jar import conflict.
Maybe you shouldn't have done that thing in Jarheim for Superman.
Now, that last bit is definitely a sentiment that I think the general masses, and media outlets especially, would toss around after everything that's transpired, but it should still be dwarfed by the realization that not only can Superman be beaten, he was manhandled by a metahuman presenting themselves as an operative of a sovereign nation. That is the talking point that should be running across every major headline. There were people that Superman was unable to protect or save, but the world, along with even Clark himself, never at any point weighed the stakes of that. Hell, he's practically celebrating it all because of his story making the front page. In contrast, the reason why Pa Kent dying of a heart attack or stroke gets used so often across multiple iterations of the franchise is because it's an incredibly effective way of conveying, in spite of all the selfless and miraculous feats Superman is capable of, there are certain things beyond even his control. He simply can't save everyone. And Gunn choosing to gloss over this fact makes this version of the character all the weaker for it. This becomes ever more apparent later on during the scene where Clark and Lois are celebrating their 3-month anniversary. She points out that if he continues to interview himself, eventually people are going to connect the dots, and that it's unethical to write pieces about himself. In turn, Clark offers to let her interview him as Superman, where she instantly jumps at that opportunity while failing to recognize that interviewing her boyfriend in order to potentially further her career is a massive conflict of interest, as far as ethical journalistic standards are concerned. Look, all I'm saying is, it's rather rich of her to give Clark shit for interviewing himself because of how unethical it is, only to in turn chunk her supposed principles completely out the window when offered to do so. Regardless, the core issue with this interview is twofold. One would expect that Clark, being a journalist and all, would have some counterpoints to what are some pretty standard questions during this exchange. For example, Lois starts grilling him as to why he didn't consult the President or Secretary of State before intervening in the Baravia jar import conflict. The answer that should be the most straightforward and obvious one is that in the context of saving human lives, Clark's not afforded the luxury of spending the time on bureaucratic processes. When you're capable of stopping something horrible from happening before it happens, and you choose to do nothing, you are just as morally culpable for the outcome. But that is, unfortunately, not the answer that he gives. Superman makes it explicitly clear that he sided with one country over another based on his initial understanding of the geopolitical conflict, even as going as far to threaten Gurkos, all the while refusing to take any accountability that people were possibly hurt or killed because of his involvement. Though on the flip side, you would think that Lois would be using this interview as a way of coaching up Clark with all the different tactics journalists are going to use to try and trap him with, because she genuinely loves Clark and recognizes just how necessary he is for the entire world. But in all actuality, it turns out she has major issues with how he operates.
Replacing one tyrannical regime with another.
Is that really how you feel?
Yeah, I would question myself in the same situation and hold off a beat and consider the consequences.
People were going to die!
Which is frankly bizarre given that he's presumably saved her life numerous times.
What do you know about these biological parents of yours?
Just that they sent me here to serve humanity and to help the world to be a better place.
They said that.
They did. They sent a message along with me. That message is why I do what I do. I cherish it more than anything.
Hold up there a second. You cherish it more than anything? More than the values and morals instilled by the people who actually raised you? The message that you have to have translated by K2SO has more influence for why you choose to be Superman than the people who ultimately believed you were sent to this planet for something far greater than yourself. It's not to say everything associated with the Fortress of Solitude isn't important to Superman's characterization, but it being the foundation is a rather outrageous stretch. It's evident that all of this was constructed this way, specifically to have Clark go down a certain arc, regardless of whether or not it makes any sense, because the rest of the narrative relies on it being set up this way.
I knew this would never work.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Nothing. I told you I wasn't good at relationships.
I'm not exaggerating even in the slightest when I say that Lois's entire arc throughout the film starts off with her thinking about breaking up with Superman, to not wanting to break up with him. There's no initial doubt driven by her journalistic sensibilities that eventually blooms into a strong belief in Superman and the ideals he represents, or a newfound respect for Clark. This Lois effectively flips on a dime whenever the script demands it of her, as we will see very shortly. But after that disaster of an interview, we cut away to Lex at the Pentagon trying to pitch to the US government to agree to fund his planetary defense force, which is comprised of flying armored raptor units and metahumans that he personally engineered, even going as far to claim Ultraman as the most powerful being on the planet. The most brain-melting part of this scene is that no one in this room pays any lip service to the revelation that not only is Lex Luthor capable of creating metahumans, but one potentially powerful enough to kill Superman and is a slave to his every command. By Lex's own logic, he's just as much of a threat, if not more so, to the US government than Superman is. With this deal, who would Lex ultimately be accountable to? With Superman gone, he would hold all the bargaining power, and they would effectively be resorted to chunking money at him in the hopes of his interests aligning with theirs. And again, it makes no sense that Lex is even here asking for money in the first place when it comes to Planet Watch, because he already has all the resources. He has all the means. Metahumans have apparently existed on this planet for 3 centuries. Why play this convoluted game of cat and mouse between Bravia and the US, when all he would have to do is disguise Ultraman as an otherworldly invader and no one would be the wiser? It's not like the feds ever bother with assigning someone to monitor his entire operation, when by all accounts they 1000% should, given everything that's been revealed during this meeting. It's equally strange that Lex never weighs the chance of the government attempting to steal his metahuman research to create an even more powerful Ultraman to strong-arm him into giving up his technology and weapons. Is there any dirt or leverage up his sleeve that he can exploit against these politicians? What safeguards has he put in place to ensure that something like this can't happen? Frankly, I have no clue, because to put it simply, neither does James Gunn. However, the US government tacitly allows Planet Watch to exist, despite that being an outrageously terrible idea, but deny his request to go after Superman because it would look bad optically, and the only thing that would convince them otherwise is evidence of Superman's malicious intent. In response, Lex flies to Antarctica with the engineer, Ultraman, and his girlfriend Eve, who is casually taking selfies in the background. This may seem like a pretty trivial thing now, but believe me when I say it will become astronomically crucial further down the line. But as they approach the Fortress of Solitude, the door miraculously opens, followed by the Kryptonian clankers giving them a 1,000-yard stare before getting shredded to pieces. As I pointed out earlier, it's pretty insane that the fortress isn't equipped with any countermeasures/surveillance system, or that the droids at the very least aren't able to send out an SOS message to Superman, especially when you consider that Clark spotted the engineer headed straight for his mega-secret base just the other day. Though Krypto swoops in to make a last-ditch effort to fend them off, but anticlimactically gets muzzled with the engineer's nanite goo. This is a recurring bit that Gunn likes to use, where he will initially tease some prevailing heroic scene or a really heartfelt moment between characters, only to completely undercut it with humor that a lot of the time doesn't land that well. At least to me personally. And while having quippy and irreverent banter is definitely part of Gunn's writing style, his other films still allowed scenes to breathe at least. It's almost as if the script is mandated to not linger on anything for too long because it has to keep jumping from plot point to plot point. Speaking of which, Lex orders the engineer to use her nanite tentacles to access the Fortress's computer, because hacking into secret alien technology and restoring damaged Kryptonian messages is something she can just do, apparently? A rather astronomical leap that the script has decided to make. Never mind that they shouldn't even be able to decipher the message at this point, since they without hesitation demolished the only things capable of translating a language that no one on this planet speaks or has ever studied. I guess Lex Luthor, the man who uncovered this otherworldly secret, has no interest in having these droids brought back to his lab to be examined and possibly repaired. And the reasoning behind Lex and the engineer's methods are just as thin and confusing.
Nothing's felt right since he showed up.
I know, Lex. I've sacrificed my own humanity to help get rid of it.
Okay, but why though? What did Superman do that was so egregious that it warranted sacrificing her humanity over to possess the means of killing him? And how exactly does being a metahuman make someone less of, or not even human at all in her eyes? Shame that we won't ever get answers to any of that, because this is unfortunately the only form of characterization that this movie is going to give her. Though as she's hacking into the system, the engineer asks Lex what they should do if Superman shows up. Or Lex simply states that he's created a distraction that should keep Clark busy that happens to take the form of a fire-breathing kaiju. You would assume Lex, being the 300 IQ criminal mastermind that he is, would order his lackeys to wear masks before committing an act of domestic terrorism in a well-lit area that most likely has security cameras and people nearby to avoid having all this be linked back to him. I mean, not doing that would almost be as stupid as allowing his girlfriend to take incriminating selfies in his main control center. But I digress. In terms of the battle overall, it's actually one of the more tolerable scenes in the movie. We're given a proper power scale of Superman's strengths and abilities, while having him actively trying his best to deal with a situation that doesn't get people hurt in the process. It's our first real glimpse of what David Cornsweet brings to the table as Superman, and honestly, it's some pretty solid stuff. Seeing Clark swoop in to save a woman and then attempt to lessen her state of shock in a stoic manner is exactly the type of thing you go to see a Superman film for. I almost wish that this is where Gunn had decided to kick everything off. I say almost, because any semblance of this being a Superman-focused narrative gets completely chunked in the trash with the arrival of the Justice Gang, who simply do not give a remote shit about mitigating collateral damage, going as far to sadistically stab the kaiju's eyeballs out, which nearly gets a child seriously injured in the process, and actually does get a rando harmed, prompting Clark to yell at them to be careful. Standing on the sidelines while being ignored by the rest of his teammates is unfortunately all Superman's relegated to for pretty much the rest of this fight, because eventually Mr. Terrific launches his T-spheres into the kaiju's stomach and blows it up. Also, as a side note, would have loved for them to have bothered showing up while the Hammer was laser beaming civilians and nearly killed Superman. Though in fairness, Green Lantern does eventually give a reason for that, it's just a profoundly shit one. Either way, their celebration gets cut short by everyone's attention getting pulled away to a nearby news broadcast, where we're subjected to what is arguably the most catastrophically retarded part of this whole movie.
28 of the world's top linguists have confirmed the translation, and 30 of the top forensic computer techs have confirmed the validity of the footage itself.
The people there are simple and profoundly confused. Lord over the planet as the last son of Krypton.
Take as many wives as you can, so your genes and Krypton's might and legacy will live on in this new frontier.
Just a little quick shout out to
James Gunn's Superman.
And I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog shit.
Lex, somehow, in a matter of mere hours, has managed to fly all the way from Antarctica, track down people who are supposedly capable of translating a language that, again, I must emphasize, has never been spoken or studied before on this planet, and reveals to the entire world that the second half of Jor-El and Laura's message to Clark is for him to rule the planet without mercy and to get hella bitches. The justification given for why the entire world instantly believes this message to be real and not some cut-together shitpost or AI slop is...
So it's gotta be doctored.
No way, Clark. I know this computer forensics guys. They're not gonna say it's legit unless they are sure.
It's legit because these computer forensic people would never lie? They couldn't have been strong-armed into saying it's real, been paid off by Luthor, or that Lex made a really convincing fake? None of that could remotely be in the realm of possibility? Wouldn't you, a member of the Justice Gang, want to personally verify all this for yourself? It also doesn't really explain all these people Superman helped save from certain death just seconds ago suddenly turning on him. There's not a single person in this crowd that's skeptical about this message being legit. Man, those 3 years of him being active as Superman really bought him a ton of goodwill from the public.
I was a big Superman fan. I supported him all the time online and stuff, but now? I mean, I hope he rots in hell.
After sitting here for an eternity chatting with the Justice Gang, though, Clark finally realizes that the only way Lex could have possibly gotten that message was by breaking into the fortress. So he flies back to Antarctica only to find all his droids dismantled and that crypto has been taken. In a fit of rage, Superman zooms over to the Luthor Corp building and is recorded yelling at Lex, insisting he was the one who took the dog. Not to say that Clark crashing out over all of this in Lex's office isn't justified, because it 100% is. It's just really goddamn strange that he never mentions anything about the message whatsoever, when he should still be under the strong belief that Lex absolutely doctored that clip. Call me crazy, but I'm not all that convinced that Superman would buy the whole authority figures and experts would never lie about anything ever bullshit that Mr. Terrific spewed at him 10 minutes ago. But all that aside, this clip Eve recorded naturally gets used to spin Superman as some unhinged maniac on a late-night news show, where Clark arrives back at his apartment to find Lois waiting for him. The two make up over the fight they had, which in itself would be fine if their entire conversation were taking place while an interdimensional imp is invading Metropolis in the background.
You were out there helping them?
Oh no, that's just some dimensional imp.
That is grade A fucking nonsense. Even if he believed this imp wasn't a huge risk to the city, he would still make the effort to go out and help people, even if he was feeling depressed or in the middle of getting cancelled, because that's who Superman is. It is in his nature to do the morally correct thing, even at great personal expense, and that alone would speak volumes over some controversy that's being spun about his supposed ulterior motives. Pawning off the responsibility onto the Justice Gang in order to have this conversation doesn't work, not just because all of them clearly couldn't care less about mitigating collateral damage, which is another crucial reason for why Clark should be there, but because it's completely out of line with who even this Superman was established to be prior to this scene. However, Superman decides that his best course of action for rescuing Krypto is to turn himself into the DOJ and hope that through the luck of the cosmos, he'll get brought to the same facility they're keeping Krypto at.
I like your plan, except it sucks.
Not entirely sure what mental gymnastics Clark pulled to arrive at such a crazy-ass conclusion for why this is something he absolutely must do, when for all he knows at this point in time, the US government has zero connections with Lex. Again, this is a Superman who we've been told has been operating for 3 years. Surely he's had positive interactions with US officials prior to all this, and that his past actions with saving Metropolis, or possibly the world even, would have to account for something. To him, this should be nothing more than a simple mix-up that he'll be able to quickly settle with Rick Flag Sr. Hell, the first line he has in the movie is him acknowledging that while Superman might be naive at times, he ultimately has good intentions, hinting that the two of them have a decent rapport together.
Maybe they'll take me wherever they took the dog. I don't know how else to find him.
It's a dog.
You know, Lois, I feel like you should be more concerned about your boyfriend gambling away the safety of the entire planet by turning himself in just to maybe find out where Lex took his dog. You just watched another metahuman nearly murder him the other day. Who's to say the US government doesn't have the means of killing or torturing Superman? Any of that would have been a 100 times better and more relevant response than, "Who cares, it's just a dog, lol." Though as Superman flies away, we immediately cut to the next scene where Ultraman is pinning him down to the ground. Now I realize that I basically rocket launched the cat out of the bag extremely early on about Ultraman actually being a clone of Clark, but it was essential due to the fact that Superman should have been able to use his X-ray vision to uncover who's underneath the suit. And before I get people trying to headcanon this away by suggesting that his suit is made of lead, the movie itself never establishes that to be the case, and we are clearly shown that this version of Superman has see-through stuff vision that gets called X-ray vision for simplicity's sake. Surely after being pinned down to the ground by a metahuman strong enough to overpower him, Earth's most powerful metahuman by the way, he would be incredibly curious and try to use his X-ray vision to uncover who Ultraman is, but he doesn't, which is a plot hole no matter how hard you try to spin it. That said, as Superman is fixing to be loaded up in Lex's ship, Rick Flag Sr. gives us some rather clunky context as to why we're not going to be given any court trial or interrogation session from the feds.
Of course, decided those rights don't apply to extraterrestrial organisms. Therefore, at this point, Superman, you don't have any rights to read. So we've outsourced your confinement and your interrogation to Planet Watch.
Planet Watch.
That kind of defeats the whole goddamn point of Lex getting approval from the government to imprison and execute Superman, if Lex killing him was never considered to be a crime in the first place. You're really going to sit here and shove in my face at the very beginning of the film that metahumans have existed on this planet for over 3 centuries, some of which would have absolutely been extraterrestrial, and the best legislation mankind could draft up for dealing with this philosophical and existential question is just to say, screw it, only humans can have legal rights. Superman is an agent capable of rational thought and clearly can be reasoned with. He submitted himself to the authorities of his own accord. Plus all the times he saved entire cities, if not the planet itself, from certain destruction over the past 3 years can't really be ignored, regardless whether or not the government suspects he had ulterior motives for doing so. To really rub some more salt in this wound, the feds have no interest in appointing someone to oversee Planet Watch's detainment and interrogation of Superman, despite multiple high-ranking members of the Pentagon expressing their doubts about Lex and his intentions.
You buying this?
I don't put anything past Luthor, Rick. But the message is authentic.
It's as if the world building needed to be this shallow and clumsy in order to facilitate the rest of the plot. DC wanted to restart their cinematic universe by prominently putting the cart before the horse, and then release videos after the fact about how woefully unequipped they are to deal with the broader ramifications attached with setting everything up in the schizo manner that they did.
What's canon can really be whatever you want to be canon, and none of this is real.
The DCU begins canonically with Creature Commandos, and then Superman continues the DCU, and then Peacemaker Season 2. Just know that those three things are canon.
So what's canon can really be whatever you want to be canon.
Anyway, Superman is brought to a base, which is, funnily enough, not all that far away from Metropolis, where we're presented with one of Lex's dimensional portals that he has set up all over the world that he can use to access his pocket universe.
Where are we?
A pocket universe. I replicated the Big Bang with a Luthor Corp mega collider tearing a tiny hole between the two universal fabrics.
That's all well and good, I guess, but the more pressing head-scratcher I'm left with is how, in the absolute peanut butter fuck, has Lex managed to keep this unfathomably groundbreaking technology a secret for all this time? One of these portals is just sitting here under a tent with not so much as a padlock on it, another somehow tucked away in a head of state's office, and the other on the top floor of the Luthor Corp building where Eve regularly posts selfies and streams at. Lex's entire plan, if you can necessarily call it that, hinges on his pocket universe remaining a secret from the general masses, when by every conceivable metric there's no way that should be remotely possible when you factor in just how many loose ends are at play here. God forbid if Gurkos ever decides to double-cross Lex, or sell him out to the American government after being put in a difficult situation because of all of his schemes. In fact, I'm not really sure why Gurkos needs to have access to the pocket universe in the first place, or why Lex would even want him to, given the cataclysmic risk attached with using one of these portals.
When creating a pocket universe, if you are just 1 picometer off, you will have a black hole where Earth used to be. And every time you enter or exit, you risk tearing a hole in the fabric of reality.
On top of all of that, you have the broader world-building implications of Lex Luthor having the means of creating universes. That world governments are not only aware that his pocket dimension exists, but that they pay him money to imprison political dissidents and don't have representatives appointed there to keep tabs on Luthor, nor are they actively trying to steal his research to build this technology for themselves. Look, making the creative decisions to forego origin stories entirely doesn't give you a pass to piss all over the very vital concept of world building, especially in the first major installment of your rebooted cinematic universe. However, Lex has Metamorpho create kryptonite, rendering Superman out of commission for a good chunk of the movie, where we then cut away to Lois and Jimmy at the Daily Planet chatting about Bravia massing their troops on Jar and Port's borders.
I have a connection at Boda Bank. Yes, Luthor Corp sold them approximately $80 billion worth of arms, but for those arms, Bravia paid only $1.625 billion.
So Luthor gave them arms for free. For what?
That's the $78,375 million question.
Have you found out?
I realize this is a bit of a nitpick, but you're seriously going to pitch to me that Lois is the only journalist to uncover this $78 billion question mark? Arguably, the wealthiest man on the planet has been shipping billions of dollars worth of weapons to a sovereign nation over the course of 2 years, and not a single person in the press or media has made any effort to dig into the specifics of this until now. Yeah, gonna have to massively press X to doubt on that one. After hearing this bombshell revelation, Jimmy asks Lois if she knows where Superman is being kept, where she says that she has no idea and that the government is being incredibly tight-lipped about it.
Lex is holding Superman in a pocket universe.
A what?
Holy hell, you could not have set this up in a more wildly contrived fashion if you tried. Jimmy conveniently has Lex Luthor's girlfriend's number, and on a whim decides to ask her to divulge what is currently classified government intelligence, and in a matter of seconds, just does. Never mind the fact that Jimmy has clearly been ghosting her for God knows how long, giving Eve absolutely no incentive to give him such a massive scoop. Then there's the tidbit of her revealing this information to someone who is in the most opportune situation to relay it to the only person capable of facilitating Superman's rescue. To put it bluntly, without this Hail Mary of a text, the rest of the plot simply doesn't happen. And by God, do I really wish that it didn't happen due to what comes next.
Just my monkey bots here farming outrage 24/7, trashing you online.
Hashtag super shit.
I want you to take a moment and really soak in that there are people on this spinning rock floating through space and time that watched this unholy cinematic blight against God and unironically thought, what are you talking about? The monkey bot scene isn't cringe at all and totally belongs in the movie.
He's got an army of infinite monkeys on social media.
I fucking loved that.
Yeah.
I thought that's the stupidest thing I could have possibly seen in this movie. And I thought it was incredible.
Agreed.
Regardless, Lex exposits that he's holding Metamorpho's son hostage and that if he refuses to cooperate with him, that he'll have his henchmen execute the baby, who are conveniently sitting directly across from them. Don't worry, the film is going to completely forget about this being the case here very soon. Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice, Lois Lane is just able to casually stroll into their headquarters and inform them that Lex is imprisoning Superman in a pocket universe. Mr. Terrific is half convinced that what she's saying lines up by casually mentioning that he puts nanobot trackers into every member's bloodstream, which shows Clark's last location at Fort Kramer, and that even if he was dead, those trackers would still be there. If you're concerned that this movie is, once again, going to gloss over the ethics of a prominent member of a recognized organization having the means of doing this, and the consequences that should be attached with that, then you would be correct. Because this is the part of the film where James Gunn pulls out a Tommy gun and character massacres the hell out of all three of them.
And then do what?
Save him. You want to break a federally incarcerated prisoner out of jail? I'm a Green Lantern, lady. That means I took a vow not to get involved in politics.
Oh, that's part of the vows?
It's implied, yeah.
An implied vow?
Every time there's something he doesn't want to do, he says it's part of some vows.
Oh, I swear to God, the risk is just not worth the beef between the U.S. government and the Justice Gang.
Not our name makes us sound like cowboys, but I agree with the rest.
So the reason why the Justice League, I mean, let's be real, that's what they are right now, chose to not step in while Ultraman was melting civilians, and why they're currently refusing to help Superman now, is because, best case scenario, Green Lantern doesn't want to get involved with politics, or worst case, it's just something that he doesn't want to do, and the rest of them follow in line with Green Lantern.
Disgusting!
Is this seriously how we're going to establish these characters in what is supposed to be a cornerstone installment of the DCU? Give the audience every reason under the sun to despise them? Never mind that Mr. Terrific should be heavily insisting that they rescue Clark based on the possibility of Lex Luthor having the tech to create pocket universes alone.
When creating a pocket universe, if you are just one picometer off, you will have a black hole where Earth used to be. And every time you enter or exit, you risk tearing a hole in the fabric of reality.
This isn't some dispute over borders or international relations. All of life, as they know it, could cease to exist at any moment, and yet Mr. Terrific never thinks to bring up this rather crucial information. Green Lantern couldn't give a fuck less whether Clark lives or dies, and Hawkgirl is too lazy to do anything about it. I guess. I don't know, she's just kind of here in this movie. And yes, Mr. Terrific does to an extent come around, but only because it will supposedly piss off Guy.
So I guess you decided to help.
Only because it'll piss off Green Lantern.
What an amazing core lineup we have for the Justice League.
You're all terrible at what you do here, and I feel like I should tell you, I'd fire all of you if I could.
Later on in the film, though, Lex informs Clark that he's going to interrogate him on behalf of the US government before having him executed, because the Pentagon all of a sudden trusts him enough to do that, and picks Russian roulette as his method of torture for Superman. I have absolutely no idea why he would waste his time with any of this, when Lex has essentially already been granted the authority by the feds to kill Superman. You know, his main motivation for the entire plot. He could just make up some bullshit lie about Clark busting out and one of his guards having no other choice than to shoot him with a kryptonite bullet. Plausible deniability and all that. We're given numerous moments of Lex conspiring behind the government's back, so it makes no sense that he wouldn't do the same in regards to Superman. However, out of anyone Lex could choose from to threaten to have killed for information, he picks some rando that sells Superman hot dogs. I don't know, Lois Lane, the woman who Clark saves on a regular basis and has written hit pieces on him, one of which revealed his secret pocket dimension tech to the entire world, wasn't at the top of his list of people to pull from?
So, all this leads me to believe, as your article surmised, he really is in a pocket universe.
He's imprisoned ex-girlfriends for way less. This is a Lex Luthor who James Gunn insists is a cold, calculating pragmatist, but in the same breath resorts to using mind-controlled monkeys to create alt accounts to trash Superman online, when he could just create a single algorithm to handle all of that, and refuses to kill Clark despite being handed multiple opportunities to do so on a silver platter. He also lacks the bare common sense to not use a loaded gun during the session because it goes off on the second shot, where he and Gurkos lampshade about how much of a room temperature IQ move it was for him to use actual Russian roulette as an interrogation tactic.
I believe in you, Superman! No. Don't tell him nothing!
I didn't imagine that would go so quickly.
What in the goddamn?
Now let's compare this Lex to the one presented in Superman the Animated Series. He too is an intelligent technocrat, but not a terminally online-obsessed loser who's ass mad that people have nice things to say about Superman. If Clark served his interests, then he would simply have no need to murder him, because what Lex desires above all else is power and control. To a certain degree, he owns Metropolis. The city heavily relies on his technology, and as he terms it, is a model of his efficiency. But out of all the bureaucrats, corporate executives, or lowlifes he can influence and manipulate, he can't control Superman. It's the thematic through-line of their dynamic, and the main driving force for Lex devising schemes to have him killed, because it's evident to him that as long as Superman is around, he will always stand in the middle of obtaining his goals. And all of this was competently set up in a single episode of television. I bring this up because it showcases a stark divide in terms of quality of the material used between these two depictions of the character. James Gunn is given a whole 2-hour runtime to fully flesh out Lex, and yet still halfway through the damn film can't even competently write a scene of him interrogating his arch-nemesis.
Who are you working with here on Earth?
Lex 100% already knows the answer to this. He's been in the Fortress of Solitude. Superman doesn't work with anyone besides the Justice Gang. And what difference does it make to him if there are still randos out there that mildly help Superman in some capacity, or if John and Martha can't remain a secret? Lex has completely changed the cultural sentiment about Superman. But yeah, he ends up killing this guy, creating yet another loose end that he should have to deal with in some degree. Though as both him and Gurkos portal away, we cut to Mr. Terrific and Lois landing directly in the middle of Fort Kramer. All the Raptor guards see this massive unknown aircraft touch down in what should be a top-secret military facility at this stage, given that it contains a portal to an interdimensional prison that houses two of the strongest metahumans in existence. That again is just hidden under this tent, and they all wait nearly a whole 5 minutes before deciding to open fire on them and don't even bother to trigger any sort of alarm.
What a load of bullshit.
It's yet another example of how the believability of this world crumbles to pieces when put under the slightest bit of scrutiny. That said, Mr. Terrific handily takes out all the Raptor guards and starts hacking into the Pocket Universe portal. Meanwhile, Metamorpho is pretty bummed out about being coerced into killing an innocent person, and asks Superman if he can actually save his son. Clark tells him, yeah, totally bro, where Metamorpho proceeds to withdraw his kryptonite arm. Admittedly, this dialogue wouldn't be total ass if it weren't for one tiny issue. The guard that is sitting directly across from them. He should have absolutely overheard their entire conversation, along with being alerted by the other nearby prisoners shouting out that the both of them plan on breaking out, leading him to pull out his gun and start a countdown warning Metamorpho to create kryptonite or else he's going to shoot his kid. That would obviously result in the rest of the movie not happening though, so the script then gives Metamorpho a straight up absurd amount of time to create a mini sun that restores Superman up to full strength, allowing him to smash through to the next cell and save the baby. Look, I'm just saying, you could have at least written this guard to have some reservations about threatening the life of a child, like the other 99.999% of the world does, in order to have this scene be a bit more convincing with how all of this plays out. But from what we can tell, this guy seems to be fully on board with the whole child murder thing, if it comes to it. Regardless, Superman, Krypto, and Metamorpho manage to escape the Pocket Universe before the portal collapses. Lucky for them, but not so much for the tens of thousands of people who are still trapped in those cells. Mysteriously, Superman goes down again with kryptonite poisoning, despite Metamorpho generating a mini-sun to get him back up to full strength, which prevents him from trying to open the portal back up to rescue the other prisoners. Mr. Terrific instructs Lois to use the T-Craft to get Clark somewhere safe to recover from his wounds, while he stays here to secure the portal. Whatever the hell that means, because as we will discover later on, he absolutely does not have the tech necessary to secure the portal. And concerning that all of his fears that the entire universe could get swallowed up at any second have essentially turned out to be true, Mr. Terrific should be immediately dialing up Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, Maxwell Lord, hell, everybody for that matter about the current situation. Just to make it clear, Mr. Terrific is undoubtedly the best written character out of all the members of the Justice Gang, but it's not due to the material he's been given having any real substance or logically fitting within the world he's operating in. Not that the world James Gunn has vomited on screen is a fully realized one for that matter. It's purely because in the grand scheme of things, he is the one who actually manages to save the day in a Superman film. You could argue that he would still have needed Clark to deal with Ultraman, however their fight still would have happened either way. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Superman wakes up the next morning in his bed back in Kansas, where we're given our first dedicated conversation between Jonathan and Clark.
I'd say what you wanted that message to mean says a whole lot more about you than what anyone meant for it to mean.
They sent me here to hurt people.
Parents aren't for telling their children who they're supposed to be. Your choices, Clark. Your actions. That's what makes you who you are.
So like, where the hell has this been the entire time? It's as if the part of James Gunn's brain that's actually capable of writing meaningful dialogue woke up from a drug-induced coma and managed to churn out a heartfelt moment before being put back under. Granted, none of this should be an earth-shattering revelation to Clark that requires a whole movie-long arc for him to go down, since these are values and principles that the Kents would have instilled in him growing up. But hell, I'll take more of this please, and less of the cringe MonkeyBot Snyderverse references. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor's galaxy brain plan to draw Superman out from hiding is to open the Pocket Universe again, creating an interdimensional rift that could engulf not just his multi-billion-dollar enterprise, along with all of the technology that it's developed, but the entire planet, thereby getting in his own way of acquiring half of Jaranpur and ridding humanity from a perceived alien threat.
Oh my God!
This is simply not Lex Luthor. The real Lex would not potentially condemn his planet to death just to get one up on Superman, regardless of how deep his hatred runs for him, because obviously, being dead wouldn't serve his interests. The engineer also doesn't seem entirely jazzed about Earth getting possibly swallowed up by a black hole due to the aperture not being secure, but immediately falls back in line 5 minutes later. It's a shame because that could have proved to be a rather compelling twist, creating a situation where she's ultimately forced to put her vendetta against Superman aside and team up alongside him to take down Ultraman, and possibly by the time everything's said and done, shattering her misconceptions about who Superman is and what he actually fights for. Unveiling that Lex had been manipulating and feeding her lies to convince her to sacrifice her humanity, with plans of tossing her aside when she served no further use for him. Though that could only exist in a movie that isn't completely allergic to the concept of cause and effect, because we're subjected to another news broadcast of Baravia launching another invasion on Jaranpur. But you see, Superman can't go because saving all of existence from total annihilation takes priority, as it reasonably should. All hope for the people of Jarimpor seems lost until...
Sorry, kid. Superman couldn't make it. So you got an upgrade.
Yeah, the guy who said he doesn't get involved with politics is choosing to let Superman solo 2 metahumans capable of killing him, which could very well not give Mr. Terrific enough of a window to save all of existence if they succeed in murdering him, so that he can go deal with an international incident instead of helping save the planet.
Ironic.
I fail to see how an interdimensional rift on the cusp of destroying all of Metropolis, which warrants a whole citywide evacuation order, by the way, is less newsworthy than an ongoing political conflict. Both of those things are bad, sure, but one is 80 million times more disastrous than the other. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Hawk Girl pops out of nowhere and tosses a real curveball into the mix.
I know you won't kill me!
I'm not like Superman.
I have to say, I love that we have spent so much damn time shitting all over Clark for intervening between 2 warring countries in the interest of saving human lives without going through the proper channels beforehand, only to have Hawkgirl, a member of the Justice Gang, swoop in and assassinate a prime minister of a US allied country with total impunity and seemingly no social blowback.
This is a load of barnacles.
Moving on though, we've essentially reached the bit where Lex starts monologuing about how he controls Ultraman and reveals his overall main motive.
I created the Baravian military conflict so I'd have an excuse to kill you.
Alright, so let me lay this all out. Lex Luthor sank billions of dollars worth of his weapons to manufacture a geopolitical conflict that actually is intended to serve as a red herring for him to be granted the authority by the feds to kill Superman, when it was never a crime for him to kill Superman in the first place, because Superman doesn't have legal rights, and that it was actually the message that convinced the feds that he was a threat that needed to be dealt with, not his involvement with the Baravia-Charimpor conflict.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Well, that should be the final nail in the coffin. I suppose I could go more in depth about how wild it is that Superman throws Ultraman into a black hole rather than trying to appeal to any sort of agency he might have, or how nonsensical his death is given that it's established that he's somehow stronger than Superman, but never tears apart this bust to escape, or how depraved of a creative decision it is for the film to completely gloss over Supergirl partying on another planet while Earth is on the cusp of getting destroyed and that Clark had to save her dog from Lex Luthor's mind-controlled torture dimension. But that would require me to have any investment in the DCU going forward, and if this is the type of sludge we can expect to have spewed on screen every year, then I refuse to touch this cinematic universe with a 10-foot pole. To put a cap on this video, it's crystal clear that James Gunn has a complete fundamental misunderstanding of Superman, and either refuses to, or simply doesn't have the chops to write a dedicated character piece. Whether the creative decision to fast-track this cinematic universe came from higher-up executives or not is irrelevant because the end result remains the same, and has reminded everyone that, like Marvel, DC is incapable of learning from their mistakes, and will continue to shamelessly churn out absolute, unfettered piss. That said, if you've made it this far into the video, I seriously appreciate it. Again, I would have had this one released way sooner, but getting around the copyright bot has been ridiculous, to say the least. If you want to support what I do, then doing the usual algorithm stuff helps out immensely. Either way, thanks for watching, and until next time.
Just my monkey bots here farming outrage.
So, what's canon can really be whatever you want to be canon.